This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Crimes and Consequences. I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
My lovely co-host.
Thank you.
And today's episode is about a school shooting. So I just want to warn everyone. It happened quite a long time ago, but still. Before I get into the story, I would just like to remind everyone to hit the subscribe, follow, like button. We are on our own YouTube channel now.
I think it's at
Crimes and Consequences.
At Crimes and Consequences.
There's a couple videos up. So if you find them and it's at Crimes and Consequences or something similar, you're at the right place.
You might have to scroll down and then you can see where you can subscribe.
Yeah. So if you're interested.
But we haven't figured it exactly out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're Generation X. So I'm trying. We're trying, right? We're trying. So technology is not my strong suit. Whenever anything happens and it works, it's a miracle to me, right?
But you're getting better.
I'm getting better. Yeah.
Anyway, do you have any true crime to talk about?
Yeah, I do. So I'm going to tell you about this story. This happened around 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, December 6th, 1989. On that day, the Café Campus at the University of Montreal was busy as usual. It'd been a favorite spot for students, going back forever how long, because it was really cold that day. It gets cold up in Montreal, especially in December.
Oh, yeah.
It was a nice place for students to gather. And it was the end of the semester. It's early December. And
everybody's studying for finals.
Everybody's studying.
Probably got a little area to study.
Mm-hmm. And for some of them, like that day was their last day of classes before the holiday break. And suddenly the normal buzz of the cafe, like they look outside and they see just people running, like students running.
I just start
Hundreds
running
of
too.
them.
I just start running.
Yeah. These people bust into the cafe. Now it's like chaos. And they discover that there's a gunman on campus.
Shit.
And that evening, the world would find out that all 14 victims were women.
Oh, there were 14 victims. Spoiler alert.
14 victims were women.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about this.
I know. I didn't know about it until obviously I was researching this one. But I didn't know that Montreal had this happen in their lovely city. I've been to Montreal. It's gorgeous. Anyway.
Been to Windsor.
I've been to Windsor too, in Toronto. But okay, so I digress. Around 4 p.m. that day, so about an hour and a half earlier, the shooter left his apartment, and I'm not going to say his name until the end because he doesn't deserve it. He left wearing new work boots, a pair of jeans, a gray windbreaker, and a baseball cap. Inside his windbreaker, on his waist, he carried a hunting knife.
Knife?
Yeah, knife. He had a gun, and the type it is, like the name of it really doesn't matter, but it's the same type like SWAT teams use. Like it's a rifle, like a high powered rifle.
Well, wouldn't that be a big gun? I don't know anything about it.
It's a big gun.
So how's he carrying that around?
Well, he had that, and 100 rounds were in a green garbage bag, which he carried to a car. He leaves his apartment. He carries it to this car that he rented for the day. He drove to the university. There was a school on the university. It was called Ecole Polytechnique.
Like a college?
Like a college. And that's where like engineering students, so like students enrolled in like STEM type program. So he pays the parking attendant. He goes to Ecole Polytechnique. He pays the parking attendant and parks his car in a no parking zone. And the car ended up being found like the next day. I know. It's getting toward the end of the day, so I'm thinking nobody's really monitoring like the no parking zone.
But the fact, obviously he didn't mind if he got caught because he's parking in a parking lot in a no parking zone.
I know. It does make sense. So he gets out of his car and he ends up sitting in a highly visible spot outside the registrar's office. He sat there for some time. There were reports that people had seen him sitting there for upwards of 30 minutes.
With his garbage bag?
No, yeah, with the garbage bag. And he wasn't talking to anybody. He was just sort of scowling, and he didn't make eye contact with anyone. A staff member at the registrar's office went over to him and said, do you need anything? He didn't, and without replying to her, he stood up. So he must have been sitting. He stood up and he walked off. So that was kind of strange.
The answer is no.
The answer is no, and he leaves. About 5 p.m., the shooter begins climbing the steps to the second floor building, in the building that he goes in. And this is where like classes take place. Okay.
So it's not the cafe.
It's not the cafe. And he walks through the steel fire doors. In room 230, final presentations were being made for mechanical engineering students. They were taking place right at that time. He gets to the classroom door. He pulls his rifle out of the garbage bag, and he lets the bag fall to the floor before he just walks confidently into this classroom with the gun. And it's about 5:10 p.m. There were 2 fourth-year students giving a presentation on heat transfer at the front of the class. The shooter calmly walks up to the front of the class, and he smiles at them.
What?
No one, flinches, bats an eye or whatever.
Nobody knows what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, right?
They're all in shock.
They're just like, what the hell's going on,
What is
right?
this?
They didn't seem to react to the gun that he had. He was holding it.
What do you do?
I know. What do you do? Is this a joke? Right? He's holding it at
Is
the
there a
side.
camera around?
Yeah,
Am I
right. Is
on
this
the
candid camera or something, right? Or one of those joke programs. So the lack of reaction that he gets irritates him. And he yells, "Everybody stop everything." He then ordered that the men in the classroom stand on one side of the room and the women stand on the other side of the room. Oh, shit. And even when he says this, nobody moves.
Yeah, because they're just in shock.
They think
they have no idea what's going on.
But like we said, is this a prank?
Punk?
And somebody chuckles, and this pissed him off even more. Somebody chuckled because I'm sure it was nervous. It's me sitting in that classroom with the nerves.
I'll tell her the worst crime story, and she'll be like,
yeah. I'm like,
Everybody gets mad at you for laughing.
I know. So I'm sure he would be super pissed at me. It's a nervous laugh. So in response, he shoots twice into the ceiling, yelling, and now the students and the professor, they start to comply. So he orders the men to leave the room, and the women start, he ordered the women to stay in the classroom. He allows the men to leave, and he starts yelling, "I want women. You're all a bunch of feminists, and I hate feminists."
Doesn't he know if the men leave, they're going to call the police?
Right. That's what I thought too. Right. That would be my first thought. But 60 male students and 2 male professors leave the room.
So it's a huge
classroom. It's a huge classroom. And left behind are 9 female students standing in the corner of this classroom.
You're thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for bailing on us. But
sorry, I'm not trying to be insensitive.
No, I know.
They didn't have a choice.
No, they didn't. The shooter ordered the women to the back of the classroom, far from the front door, and without any ability to escape now. And he asks them, quote, "Are you wondering why you're here?" End quote. One of the students, her name was Annie St. Arnaud, fired back at him, "Who are you?" And he replied saying he was a man against feminists and other women like them. Women who, he said, had been taking employment opportunities from men. And another student pipes up. Her name was Natalie Provost. She said, "Well, they're just women, we're just women studying engineering and not necessarily feminists. And they weren't there to fight men, but
steal their jobs.
Yeah, steal their jobs. We just want to study some engineering." And the shooter pushes back saying, "You're all women. You're going to be engineers. You're all a bunch of feminists. I hate feminists." So he's all fired up about feminism. So Natalie looked into his eyes, and she just saw that they were just dark, and there's no getting through.
Yeah, it's empty.
Yeah, he was focused on what he was going to do, and he wasn't going to listen to anyone. And now this is when the shooting begins. 30 bullets rained upon these 9 women.
No.
Yeah.
While they're lined up?
While they're lined up. Frances Chrétien, and I'm going to struggle through these French names. So Frances Chrétien, she was a survivor. And this is what she had to say. She said, quote, The rest is sort of in slow motion in my head. I threw myself on the ground and I turned around. At times I could hear everything. At other times it was just noise, end quote.
Was she shot?
Yeah, she was. Other women fell on top of her and they were dead. And at that moment, they all start to realize he's not shooting blanks. Like, this isn't a joke.
Oh, this is horrible, Tanya.
I know. The shooter spotted another woman who did survive. Her name was Josee Martin. And Josee said quote, he had a smile on his face. He seemed very proud of himself. It's as if he was in a dream and everything was going according to plan, end quote. Of the 9 women in this classroom, 3 had been seriously injured but survived. Their 6 classmates, the other 6 classmates, which were Helene Colgan, Natalie Croatu, Barbara Daignault, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Peltier, and Annie St. Arnaud. They were the first 6 victims of this shooter.
They were just slaughtered.
They were slaughtered.
Just lined up to be slaughtered. That makes me really sad.
So he shoots everyone, and I'm guessing he's assuming everyone is dead. And he leaves the classroom, but before he leaves, he stops and he writes shit on one of the notebooks that's laying on one of the desks.
What?
I know, it's bizarre.
I always wonder when you hear about like mass shootings, they will shoot lots of people, and yet there's survivors, and you hear them being shot multiple times and stuff, and you think, how did so many survive? I think it's just part of.
I know. I always think about like the people who say, "Oh, I played dead," and I mean,
he only killed. He killed 2/3, but 1/3 survived, right?
Yeah, 1/3 survived. Yeah, absolutely. I know.
And he had all the power and all the control.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he could have killed everyone, like you said. He could have killed all 60 people, 60, 70 people in that classroom. But
anyway,
some of the men who'd been let go in the classroom, they ran to get help. But there were still several that were standing outside the door, like of the building, and they were warning people, like, don't go inside. Right. Those men, they're the ones that heard the gun being shot. They heard the women screaming. And when the shooter left the classroom, he pointed the shooter pointed his rifle at those men that were still in the corridor, and they backed up against the wall, which allowed the gunman to just continue walking down the hallway. Like, he did not attack them. He
wasn't interested in men.
No, he wasn't. Reaching the photocopiers, which were in room 229, he shot again into the room, and there was a man that was injured and a woman. They survived. And approaching these two, he ran into another woman and shot her and injured her. She made it out alive. He goes to another classroom next. He goes to classroom number 228. And this class was in session. So he scopes the students out, and he finds a woman. Like,
they haven't been stopped by the police.
No.
Like,
the police.
This happened yet?
No. The police take forever to show up, and I'll talk about that later. Okay. But I'm imagining he's poking in like a window on the door, because he doesn't go into this classroom, but he sees a woman student, a female student, sitting in the very back. He takes aim with his gun and he attempts to fire, pulling the trigger twice, but it doesn't shoot. So he realizes he's out of bullets. He heads a few, thank God. He heads a few steps away to the emergency stairway. There was a student that walks by him and hears him saying, like, shit, I'm out of bullets. But the student didn't pay the shooter any mind and continued on their way.
There's a rifle right there? Like, you're walking in the hallway and there's a guy down there. They're not even on their cell phones.
I mean, we're looking at this though from our 2024 viewpoint. So I mean, this is 1989.
But I could see if he was on a cell phone.
Yeah,
but this is before that. What's he?
Yeah, this is before that. So the student continues on his way. He was trying to get to the photocopy room. Then, it starts to dawn on him, like, wait a minute.
What the fuck was that?
He turns around and he sees the shooter raise the rifle, like, toward him. The gun went off and this student was barely missed, very narrowly, by the bullet. And he starts running toward the escalators now that are leading to the cafeteria.
And it's a guy?
It's a guy. He didn't get shot. Classroom 228 that I told you he was peeking in, that was adjacent to a server room where computers were held. At the time of the attack, as it's going on, Guy Brunel was working in the server room with a colleague. He hears these strange sounds, but the computers surrounding them were really loud. So the noises were really kind of difficult to distinguish, like not necessarily sounding like rifle fire. So at some point then, a student rushes in and yells that there's a shooter in the school.
Shit.
A professor who followed close behind the student said the gunman had opened the door to the classroom and tried to shoot, but the gun didn't work. So I'm thinking this is that classroom 228. Brunel told the students to come inside and come into the computer room, the server room. And one of them had the presence of mind to lock the door that was leading to the hallway. When the shooter returned and noticed that the door was now locked, he began shooting at it. Brunel was afraid of what would happen if he made it in. And he said, quote, "That's when it occurred to me to make everyone crawl under the false floor."
False floor?
Yeah.
What the hell is this?
Their floor, the computer had massive cords. So it's this massive server room. And the cords ran under the floor.
But how do you, the floor's got to be solid enough.
Yeah.
For people to carry that weight. So how do you get... I
don't know. There's a way to get down there. And it was, but it was only 18 inches deep.
Oh, probably for people. Yeah. When you have problems, people
can go underneath it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, my 18 inches.
18 inches high. So
I have claustrophobia.
I know. So I'm not sure exactly how many people were crammed into this space, but he also says in such circumstances, you manage to squeeze in, right?
Oh my gosh. My heart is racing right now.
I know. And the locked door held. And Brunel and his colleague, there were 8 students from that classroom who squeezed in there, and a lecturer. And they're laying there and they're listening, and they hear shots being fired outside. When the shooter walks away from room 228, he continues down the hallway, and that's where he'd shot into the copier room. Then he bumps into a woman coming down the escalator, and she was on her way to the server room. He shot her, but she managed to get up and run to the emergency stairway, and she found a place to hide on the 5th floor. Instead of following her, he made his way to a counter where he spotted a woman hiding underneath. He shot toward her twice, and he missed both times.
What? Wow, good.
Yeah, good. He missed her.
Wow.
Now it's been less than 15 minutes.
Okay, so this is all very quick.
Yeah, very quick.
But the police should be there by now.
They should be there by now. And so since it's been 15 minutes. News was spreading throughout the building. So
I would hope so. By
the time the gunman reached the Office of Financial Services, they had just been informed of the attack. And a woman named Maurice Lagunière had just put on her jacket and her boots to leave for the day. The shooter spotted her, and they both hurried toward the door. Maurice was fighting to lock it, and the gunman was fighting to be able to take a shot to her. She succeeded, but there was a small window next to the door. The shooter shoots through the window, and Maurice is wounded, and she would eventually pass away on the floor of her office, and she unfortunately was pregnant with her first child.
Stop it.
This is a bad one.
Stop it.
So after he kills Maurice, the shooter returned to the escalator and goes down to the cafeteria, which is on the 1st floor. There was about 100 people in the cafeteria. The noise, it's noisy. Everybody's confused. Yeah. And the manager of the cafeteria begins evacuating people out the service door. But the shooter found his way in and aimed at a woman near the kitchen. He took a shot and he killed Barbara Maria Kluznik Vidovich.
Okay.
Vidovich. And as people begin to panic and run, the gunman took a few more shots, injuring one other person. Then he slowly made his way to the other end of the cafeteria, where he spotted Genevieve Bergeron and Anne-Marie Edward at the poly party room, which was a storage closet in the back where AV equipment was stored and other items. He shot and killed both of these women before exiting the cafeteria.
I'm so pissed right now.
Genevieve and Anne-Marie would be the last victims to be found when the police finally did like a final sweep of the building.
And they were probably, were they hiding there? Like, I would think
They were, yeah, right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be a safe place.
You would think. The gunman then takes the escalator, which now is no longer moving. It gets turned off at some point. He goes up to the third floor. There were several people on the third floor still, and he quickly begins shooting, injuring 2 men and a woman. Around 5:25, the shooter arrives in classroom 311.
They're not active in that classroom, Tommy. They're not doing a lecture.
They are doing their final presentations as well.
Stop.
Yes. I don't. This building was.
This wouldn't have happened now. No. Cell phones, people texting.
Oh yeah. People would have been warned. So Professor Jean-Paul Bellion. It was a class of mechanical and thermal characterization of materials. This is why I'm not an engineer, because I have no idea what I just read.
Okay.
They're in the middle of their final presentations, as I say, and 3 students are at the front of the classroom in the middle of presenting their project. One was Maurice Leclerc. She was on stage when the shooter barged in, ordering the men to leave the room, just as he had done in that first classroom, and he immediately shot her, and then turns his guns on the students that are in the first row. Someone yelled, "Get down," leading a handful of students to fall to the floor, while others attempted to escape out the back door. Maud Hevernick was among those trying to escape. The shooter saw her, took aim, and shot several fatal bullets into her. Taking advantage of the gunman's focus on the back of the room, several students made a rush to the door in the front of the classroom. One was Michelle Richard. She was following her boyfriend out the door when she was spotted by the shooter and killed with a single bullet to the back. Then the shooter spotted several students and Professor Bellion lying between rows of tables that filled the room, trying to hide from the shooter. And he bent down to see who was on the floor. He found 4 women on the floor, and he shot one after the other. Annie Turcotte died, and the 3 other women were injured. There was another woman under the tables who had short hair, and she was ignored. So it's,
he maybe thought she was a man.
Yeah, maybe thought she was a man. Didn't recognize her as a girl. The gunman exchanged the magazine and his rifle, so he reloads. He climbs on top of one of the tables that's in the back of the room, and he starts walking from table to table, continuing to shoot until he made his way to the front where Maurice Leclerc was laying. She was severely injured, and she was moaning and begging for help. The gunman then pulls out the hunting knife that he had.
No.
On his waist.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. Jeez. And he stabbed her 3 times. Then he put his knife, 2 boxes of bullets, and his baseball cap on the professor's desk. And sitting on the stage, he took off his jacket, wrapped it around the barrel of the gun, exclaimed, "Oh shit," and shot himself in the head. And he dies.
What a coward.
It's now 5:28. So he kills himself.
Just kills
himself. Yep, kills himself right there. Professor Bellion, he stands up slowly. He tells the students that are still in the room to leave through the door in the back. Like he's trying to, tell them. Calm everybody down, okay. He doesn't look at the stage. He doesn't want to see. But he stays and he walks around the room. He finds 4 of his female students dead and another severely injured. While trying to reassure the injured student, he walked back and forth between her and the hallway, keeping an eye out for help, but no one. Yeah,
where's police?
Yeah, there's not even like an ambulance, nothing. But no one now knows that the shooter's dead. So, okay. But again, there's nobody, and it's been like a half an hour, 20 minutes maybe since the shooting began.
That happened in less than 30 minutes.
Yeah. The 3 injured women that were in room 230 where the shooting began was Josee Martin, Frances Chrétien, and Natalie Provost. They hadn't moved at that point. They were still injured. They were still alive. Several people had thought there had to be more than one shooter. Like eventually people start to think.
Because he's all over the place.
Yeah, he's all over the place. He's on the 3rd floor. He's on the 5th floor. He's down in the cafeteria.
Cafe.
Yeah. None of the three women that were injured in that, none of these three women realize that they realize they're injured, but they don't feel safe enough to move yet.
Oh, hell, I would play dead all out.
Yeah.
I don't care how long, till the police came.
Right. I
am dead.
And Natalie attempted to get up to get help, and she realized she'd been shot several times in her legs, so she just couldn't move. Just a few minutes later, the door opened, and several students looking for an emergency exit came running in. Then two more entered. Men looking for women they had to leave behind when they were told to get out of the classroom. Seeing the injuries to their classmates, they ran to get help. And at that point, no one has seen a police officer or a paramedic enter the building. While at the same time, those attempting to call for emergency services weren't able to get through because of the number of calls that were being made.
Wow.
One of the people attempting to call, his name was Louis Corville. He was the director of the Ecole Polytechnique. And he said, quote, "Through the window, I could see hundreds of students in their shirts pour out the doors," because they didn't put their jackets on. It's winter. He said, "pour out the doors and jump over the snowbanks," end quote. He had heard gunshots from his office, not knowing until later that those were the shots that killed Maurice Legenier.
I'm just thinking, if you have a university, the police can't, there's got to be a police department relatively close. I mean, at Michigan State, it was, I mean, you're on
campus police.
Yeah, and there's campus police. I mean, I'm not blaming the police. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that I would think that 20 minutes is an awfully long time to respond to some sort of emergency. And I will get into it. So the coroner report came out in May of 1990 and included details of the events explaining why help took so long to reach the school that day. When the first call came in, it was 5:12 p.m. in the evening, and the operator attempted to forward the call to police dispatch, but encountered technical difficulties.
What?
Making him unable to transfer the call.
What?
This was due to new procedures having been implemented in a transition from paper notes used to communicate messages between the operators and dispatch to using a computer system.
Well, then just do a paper note.
I know. And the new system wasn't quite working yet.
What the fuck? We're talking about like a 911 system here.
And even more frustrating is that the emergency services, like where the calls come in, were in the room right next door to police dispatch. In the same building. They could have just easily, like you said, did a paper note.
Don't even need to do a paper note.
No.
Hey.
Like, hey, there's some shit going on
campus.
Right. The second call received was from a security guard on campus who called after being alerted by a professor that, quote, "an armed individual is harassing students in room 230. This call was sent to the hospital, who dispatched ambulances, but they didn't seem to know the address to the Ecole Polytechnique that's on the University of Montreal campus. And
why would you send an ambulance for harassment?
I don't know. I know, like...
I'm sure there's some lessons learned from all of
there's
this.
some big lessons learned. The new computer system didn't have the specific address in the database, so they were asking everyone who was calling in about the attack for the address, which slowed down the arrival of the ambulances. About 5:16, the police are finally dispatched to the school. So 4 minutes.
That's not that bad.
That's not too bad.
That's not bad. I'm not going to blame them. That's not bad.
However, the incident reported was given a code associated with hostage situations and not a shooter. It was said that, quote, "a suspect with an armed rifle is holding 20 women as hostages in a classroom on the second floor and has fired in the air," end quote. I mean, close.
Okay,
close.
I didn't know, like, there's a difference, hostage, shooter.
I guess.
Or somebody holding people hostage and firing a gun in the air.
I guess, though, in a hostage situation, I think police are hoping like they haven't shot anybody yet, and maybe they can get everybody out alive, as opposed to if you've shot somebody already. And I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I'm not a professional.
I am not a trained professional. No. I'm not going to judge. I'm done judging.
Additionally, I know. Additionally, the dispatcher gave the police the address of 2500 Edouard Montpetit Boulevard without specifying the incident was taking place at the Ecole Polytechnique. 2 police cruisers hurried to get over to help, and they end up at the student dorms that were at 2500 Edouard Montpetit Boulevard. And now it's 5:19. It takes another 2 minutes for them to get to the correct place. Once the first ambulance arrived, injured students approached seeking help. While they were coming out to receive aid, no one was going in, though. Like, no police. The police were beginning to arrive in greater numbers and establishing a perimeter for the hostage situation that they were dispatched to.
But there's injured people outside.
Right. The perimeter would be hundreds of meters away from the building per protocol, and no one was allowed in the building. With the lack of communication and coordination between the police officers and the fact that emergency services didn't know what was going on regarding the size and the scope of this massacre, they had difficulty knowing how many ambulances to send or how many personnel were needed. Finally, at 5:25 p.m., a student's calls transferred directly to the police, giving information on gunshots and injuries. At 5:26, another student described in detail the look of the shooter. A minute later after that, another student is granted permission to pull the fire alarm, leading to 8 fire trucks arriving.
I didn't even think about that.
I know, right? Pulling the fire alarm. Eventually, with all the calls coming in reporting gunshots, some police suggest going into the building. But those in charge decided to wait until additional officers showed up. The coroner's report concluded, quote, "In that moment, no intervention strategy is underway, nor is there a strategy about to be implemented or even formulated," end quote. This protocol prevented all first responders from providing aid to the injured inside the school. However, there was a young man inside the school. He was a student there, but he also happened to work as a paramedic. So he had classes that day. And that young man went from person to person, trying to care for everyone that he came across. And he stayed to help.
Bless him.
At 5:36 p.m., the police received the information that the shooter has committed suicide, and they were authorized to go in the building. Professor Boileau sought them out, and he led them to room 311, where the shooter was laying dead. Finally, at 5:45, the medical emergency team walked in through the doors, and even though they'd been outside for about 21 minutes at that point, when the police and security staff finally walked through the building, it gave the students inside the knowledge that it was safe to come out, because a lot of them still don't know.
Yeah,
right?
This is just chaos.
I know, it's complete chaos.
It's just clusterfuck.
Yeah. The group that had hid in the false floor of the server room, they'd been in that floor for about 40 minutes now.
Oh, my gosh.
And the employee, Brunel, he stated, quote, "At one point, the shots stopped. Then through the PA system, someone told us to evacuate the school slowly, walking, not running. We came out of the hole. It was crazy."
How do you know if that person's legit?
I know, right? Oh, my God, you're right. I didn't even think of that. Oh, he said there was so much blood on the second floor that it was hard to make our way out. And we saw so many injured, end quote. It wasn't until 6:02 p.m. that the first severely injured person was evacuated. And it would take nearly 40 minutes before every victim had been transported to the hospital. Maurice Leginier, she was the one that had been shot in her office. Remember, she was pregnant.
Yeah.
She was initially found alive. With the door locked, it had to be forced open. Police officer Carol Bilodeau said, quote, "Maurice was lying on the ground, unconscious. She was severely injured. I talked to her, but she didn't react. I took her pulse. I waited for help. It was crazy. We couldn't send messages out. There were so many messages coming in. I held her arm and stayed with her until she passed. It didn't take very long," end quote. At least she wasn't alone. The gunman, this
So you're going to tell me who he is now?
Yes, his name is Mark Lapine. He was found with a suicide note in his pocket.
Oh.
And Mark Lapine, that's his name. He had changed his name. I'm not even going to really go into his background because it really doesn't matter.
Because he's a piece of shit.
But it was his name that he changed it to when he became older. So he wrote it in French. So translated to English, I'm sure that there's going to be some bastardization of the original French translation.
But it won't be your fault.
Yeah. So forgive me if there's any mistakes. This is what he wrote. Quote, "Would you believe that my suicide today, December 6, 1989, is not because of money problems? I waited until I exhausted my financial means, even refusing jobs, but for political reasons, because I have decided to send the feminists who have always ruined my life to their maker. For 7 years, life has brought me no joy, and being totally carefree, I have decided to put an end to those bad-tempered women. Even if the mad killer epitaph will be attributed to me by the media, I consider myself a rational intellectual that only the arrival of the Grim Reaper has forced to take extreme acts. For why continue living if it's only to please the government? Being rather backward-looking by nature, except for science, the feminists have always enraged me. They want to keep the advantages of women, like cheaper insurance, extended maternity leave, preventative leave, while seizing for themselves those of men, the advantages. Thus, it's an obvious truth that if the Olympic Games removed men-women distinctions, there would be women only in graceful events. It's being very sexist here.
Oh, my God.
So the feminists are not fighting to remove that barrier. They are so opportunistic. They do not neglect to profit from the knowledge accumulated by men through the ages. They always try to misrepresent them every time they can. Thus, the other day I heard they were honoring the Canadian men and women who fought at the front lines during the World Wars. How can you explain that since women were not authorized to go to the front line? Will we hear of Caesar's female legions and female galley slaves who, of course, took up 50% of the ranks of history, though they never existed?" End quote. The suicide note includes a list of 19 names and phone numbers of women he'd identified as feminists, stating the list was of women who, quote, "nearly died today. The lack of time, because I started too late, has allowed these radical feminists to survive," end quote. The final line of the note, I'm not even going to pronounce it in French, but it means either the die has been cast or there's no turning back, which is a similar meaning.
I fucking hate him.
I know. What a nut job.
I wonder if he had some paranoid personality disorder or was developing some sort of paranoia. I know. What feminists, who did what?
I know.
What happened? What you said like 7 years ago?
Yeah.
Or several? What was it?
Yeah. You're right.
What happened?
He's been feeling this for several years.
Well, women need to take time off for maternity leave because you ever had a baby?
Yeah. I mean, he hasn't. I mean, I would gladly have traded.
Yeah.
You have the baby.
Go to work. Yeah. You be pregnant and stay home.
I know, right? No thanks.
What the hell?
Yeah. It wasn't until 9 p.m. that the news began to report that all the victims of this massacre were women. In the French language, which is the official language of the
all the victims
province,
that died.
Yes. Words, in French, words have masculine and feminine meaning. So some words are feminine Spanish. And some words are masculine. Yeah, like Spanish. And the bias of the culture there, in the news reports, was made clear when the Minister of Education offered his deepest condolences to the families of the étudiants, which is the masculine form of the word students. Other leaders went on to offer condolences using words like victims, youth, and loved ones. No one spoke of the fact they were all women. None acknowledged the statements of the gunman, nor the words in the suicide note. Many journalists assigned to work on this case were men, a fact that reporter Shelley Page noticed. It would make clear the degree her bosses didn't trust her coverage, and the anxiety about sending a young woman to cover the carnage surrounding a massacre of young women was palatable. Instead, it was addressed as a concern about the young reporter's ability to be objective. In the days after the shooting, Natalie Provost, she had been shot,
right,
and she'd been hospitalized with her injuries, and she heard men on the radio supporting the shooter's actions. After hearing this, and I'm sure she was all fucking fired up. Yeah. She decides to meet with journalists in her hospital room.
She's pissed.
Yeah, she's pissed. Feeling it's necessary as a survivor of the shooting, also a member of the Polytechnique Student Association, and having a seat on the board of the school. She felt like she needed to be heard. So during the short press conference from her hospital bed, she simply said, quote, "To all the young women in Quebec who are thinking about studying engineering, I'm asking you to consider this career with as much enthusiasm as you did before Wednesday," end quote. She also said in response to those looking for anyone to blame other than the gunman, she said, quote, "There's only one culprit and he's dead," end quote.
What about his parents?
Yeah, I'm not even going to get into it.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. So, female columnists came out in the following days with scathing analysis of the events. There was just a lot of stuff that went on that probably really took the focus off of the victims, I feel like. They were, it kind of minimized initially. The whole culture kind of minimized that the victims were all women. So...
Well, in the end, they are victims.
Yes. Yes.
But I get your point. The reason why they were victims is because they were female.
Right. And I know he shot a few men.
Yeah, he shot some men.
I do know that. I do recognize that. But, it's important to, and I think it's important to note that's what his focus was. I mean,
he wanted people, but then again, he wanted people to know how anti-feminist he was. So I don't know, maybe he doesn't deserve the word to be spread.
That's true. So the day after the shooting, the mayor of Montreal, his name was Jean Dore, he held a press conference. He directly called out the prejudice of the killer, and he openly cried when speaking to reporters. Aww. Something that's very rare with public figures, and even less so for male public figures. He personally knew Genevieve Bergeron, whose mom was a city council member, and he knew her very well. Since the shooting happened, there was a study of security at the school, which identified gaps, obviously, indicating that if the gunman hadn't decided to stop when he did and killed himself, he likely could have continued unimpeded
for a while.
Yeah, until he ran out of bullets.
Right.
The security system around the campus was completely redone, and the emergency phone system became, it removed the need for addresses to be exchanged at all. I think it's just automatic. The approach proved successful because there were future campus shootings.
Copycat.
Yep, in 1992 and 2006.
Jeez.
And the speed of emergency response has taken priority.
And we are not police bashing here at all.
No, it's the system. And it's
89.
It's the culture. It's 1989, like I mentioned before. You don't think, if it's never happened, you don't think like, oh my God, it's a school shooting or something like that. I mean, I think we're all very aware of it now.
It was just a shit show.
Yeah.
I don't think they knew how to respond. Yeah. And, the whole idea of not mentioning they're all female, I do think is wrong. I want to point that out. It is wrong. But, I think it is important that they should have said that should have been the whole point, and to help people like him learn, it's okay to be feminist. Yes, they're not whatever you think. They're not taking jobs, whatever.
Right. I mean,
it's a lesson to be learned.
Yeah, there's a lesson to be learned because it's obviously a deeper cultural issue at that point that he was experiencing. Yeah, and I mean. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
It's just hard to believe that high officials wouldn't even acknowledge that.
Yeah,
that wouldn't fly these days.
No, it would not. No, people would be all fucking up in arms. Yep. So, gun control became a top priority in the years following this Montreal massacre. The shooter, when he got his guns, he had gone to the Montreal headquarters of Quebec Provincial Police to get an application form for a firearms acquisition certificate. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble talking. He went there on August 29th, 1989, so a few months before the shooting. 6 weeks later, he was issued his certificate. That's when he went shopping at a sporting goods store. On November 21st, he went to the store one last time and purchased the rifle he would use during the massacre. There were also many gun laws passed by the legislature concerning background checks.
Did they even allow guns in Canada?
I don't know. Do they? I didn't think they did.
I don't think
they. I don't know how he got one. I think because of this, maybe some laws changed. That's what I'm thinking. There were lots of laws that were changed or established. So I think there was a big crackdown after this. So they, like I said, there were many laws passed concerning background checks, mandatory safety training, requiring a permit to purchase firearms and ammo and things like that. So I don't think it's as widespread as like you can walk into a store today here and buy as many guns as you want.
Definitely not.
Yeah. So of the students that were killed, 12 were engineering students. One was a nursing student and one was an employee of the university. 14 other people were injured, just to let you all know. It was quite a few victims. When referencing the loss of these women, it's important to realize, it's not the loss of human life. It's also the loss of what they could have become. They were all very bright women. They could have done great things.
Completely innocent victims whose lives just got destroyed randomly.
Right.
One day while in college.
Yeah, they could have been inventors or, discovered something. So the one student, Natalie Provost, who dared to say she wasn't a feminist, she really did some self-reflection. And she said in the newspaper in 2014 that, quote, "When I was a girl, feminism was militant women. And I wasn't the first female student at Polytechnique. There had been several before me. So when I told Mark Lapine that I wasn't a feminist, I was telling those women that there's so much more than how I saw myself. Right. I had it easy. The door was already open, so I couldn't take this beautiful title and claim it for myself." So she really did a lot of reflection on that. The shooting had no impact on enrollment of female students at the Ecole Polytechnique. They continue to register, succeed, and achieve amazing things every day. So I think, like I said, a lot of laws were passed. A lot of new procedures were put in place, all to help with future tragedies. And I think, unfortunately, I don't know if this was the first school shooting there in Montreal, but you have to have the first one in order to realize where the gaps really are.
Right,
and,
that's true. That's
true. Future generations and future students were saved by the sacrifice that these 14 women made. So,
when I was in law school, it was the first year that 51% of the students were women.
Wow.
And 49% were men.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
We're taking over.
I know. That's funny you mentioned that because at my law school, we went to different law schools. At mine, they have old composite photos in the student building where the cafeteria is.
Yeah, and it's all men in the beginning, right?
It's the older ones from 50, 60, 70 years ago are all men.
You start seeing dots of women.
Yeah, and you'd be like, oh, there's the one woman, on the composite picture, and then you start to see more and more and more. So
now we're all over the place.
Yeah. Well, the population, I think, of the United States is a majority of women. I think it's 51%, something like that. I think we're
digressing.
Yeah, but anyway.
Digressing.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Tanya.
Watching. Thank you to Leah. Sad. Yes, that was a huge tragedy. If you could hit the subscribe, follow, whatever button.
Watch us on YouTube.
Yes, watch us on YouTube.
Somehow figure it out. Crimes and Consequences.
Yes. We have a Patreon, which means you not only get this episode early release and ad-free, but we also release one extra audio episode.
Or video.
We could do the video.
I did video.
We haven't. Did you?
Last week, remember?
Yeah, I didn't publish it. I don't know.
The week before. Whatever. I did a video.
Anyway,
you didn't watch it.
You're right. I didn't watch it. You're right. It's on our Patreon.
You were with me when we did it.
It's on our Patreon. Anyway, you can go to patreon.com/TNTcrimes, or you can subscribe through the Apple Podcast app. You get the same episodes, one extra episode a week. You can go to our website, crimesandconsequences.com. We have merch there, and we are on social media, but we don't do a whole lot there. So one day we'll get it all fired up again.
We were there for a while, but
when we find an extra 5 hours a day, then we'll be able to get it done.
5.
Or hire a staff member who we don't pay. So, anyway.
A volunteer.
Yeah, volunteer. Anyway, until our next episode, everyone, thank you.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.